Sid, please tell me, how did you get into the nitrate business, and what led you to developing red spinach extract as your preferred nitrate ingredient at PLT?
Well, I have been interested in nitrates for probably 5 or 6 years. I noticed a market need with customers asking for a standardized source of nitrates. And I started working on trying to develop one using the most traditional methods, or most traditional products like beet and kale and products like that, and found that the variability was so great that in order to standardize it, you would just have to standardize to a very low level if you were going to be consistent in your results. So I came across this red spinach extract source, and they were standardized to 9%, which was exceptionally high. And after doing work on that product, reviewing it, and looking at the quality of the product, the standardization methods, the extraction methods, etc., we were very interested in and decided that this was the best of standardized nitrates, really almost the only source of standardized nitrates in the marketplace.
And I think you said something really important, which we are going to address later on in this video. The extraction method matters a lot.
Yes.
And I will ask you another question when it comes to that a little bit later on. But so we know that, as you've mentioned, there are the differences between different plant-based sources, right? In nitrates, there is a huge variability. Why is that?
Well, as you know, Mother Nature is not in the nitrate business. So when it's interesting, I'm not a horticulturist, so answering the exact question why is a little more difficult. But I know that nitrates in the plant source, in the plant source itself, is extremely variable due to geography, environment, moisture content. It even varies if you have the exact same field. If you harvest it in the morning,
Sure.
Harvest it in the evening, harvest it at different temperatures outside, everything affects nitrates. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I've learned over the last number of years working closely with the growers of raw materials, and especially beet, because that was where I focused my attention first. One would think that if you supplemented the soil with nitrates, the beets would have a higher level of nitrates. But in fact, that is not one of the better or more reliable ways of raising the nitrate content in beets, because it just varies so much from not only field to field, but just, as I said, when you harvest it and what the conditions are during harvesting.
Yes, I agree. And it comes to really every single plant-based source. The variability is huge based on the external factors that you just emphasized. So, Sid, just like majority of resync ingredients, there are extracts, and red spinach is an extract as well. Let's talk about why it is important and why you guys at PLT did decide to create an extract as opposed to a juice or a powder.
Well, going back to not to beat the same horse over and over again, but when you use a juice or an extract, I mean a juice or a powder, all the powder is the solids content of the fruit or of the vegetable. Cool. So for example, a beet powder is either going to be the solids of the whole beet, which will have more fiber, which will have a lower nitrate content in the powder itself, than a juice extract, which is the solids content of the juice. So it's a smaller fraction of the solids that's in the whole beet. So since the nitrates, the majority of the nitrates go over into the juice, then you're basically putting those solids or those nitrates into a smaller fraction of solid. Now, that being said, um, the powders of juice or of a whole beet can only have the nitrate content that is naturally occurring in the beet, and you you can't put more. I mean, you can put more in there, but that's not going to be coming from the beet. So you can never standardize a product to a higher level. You can only standardize it. You standardize down. The advantage of an extract is because we're taking that natural source of nitrates and using, well, what we're doing is using no solvents, but just water to pull the nitrates out of the red spinach without all of the solids and all of the other compounds that are in the product. You can get a higher level of nitrates, so you can standardize it to a higher level and be more consistent in the product that you get.
It's really
the nitrate level you get.
Could you please show me the math of how your red spinach extract gets its number of 9% nitrates?
Yeah, to make it simple, a red spinach extract, it takes 50 pounds of red spinach, to make 1 pound of spinach extract. So where a spinach has about 100 milligrams or 180 milligrams of nitrates per 100 grams. So that's a very low amount of nitrates in the spinach, in the whole spinach. And when I say whole spinach, I'm talking about not dried, but a whole spinach right off, which is about 90% water.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take that, and it takes 50 pounds to go to 1 pound, so you can do the math and know that it's less than 0.5% nitrates when we start, and we end up with 9% because we're extracting the nitrates from the spinach and concentrating it so it's in a much smaller percentage of powder.
But if you had to compare exactly the nitrate content to beets, beet powder, beet juices, and then red spinach extract, what is the ratio?
Well, we typically find a beet is going to be, as I said, a beet powder,
mm-hmm.
A whole beet powder using some of the best drying technologies that are out there. You'll end up with a product that's somewhere between 0.5% nitrates up to, at the most, you'll very seldom get above 3% nitrates. A juice, because it's all water, I mean, you can take that number and multiply it by, or divide it by close to 95%. So that's going to be somewhere, you're going to have you have a very low percentage content. So when people suggest you drink beet juice, they're talking about drinking 0.5 liter or 1 liter of beet juice to get a reasonable amount of nitrates. And even in that much, a 0.5 liter or 1 liter of beet juice is comparable to less than 1 gram of red spinach extract. So that's the kind of difference you see. You see anywhere from 5 to 50 times more nitrates in 1 gram of red spinach extract than you would see in 1 gram of beet powder, whole root powder, or a juice powder, or juice itself.
Yeah, it's a huge difference. So with that being said, Sid, what do you think people should pay attention to when they compare the nitrate claims that some companies make there on their label about their products containing, X amount of nitrates? Or it has, in 6 beets equivalent of that amount of nitrates, which is just such a silly comparison when companies do that. Let's educate people what it means and what they should pay attention to.
Yeah, when it says it's equivalent to a number of beets, doesn't matter what the number is. You don't know. That is telling you nothing about the nitrate content of their product, because nobody knows what the nitrate content of a particular beet is. The FDA won't even say this is the number that we would assign to the nitrate content of a beet, because it's too variable. It's between crops, you can't even say, okay, from this crop that came from this field, from this farmer, the nitrate content is about this. It's not, you can't even do that because it's too variable. So comparing their product to a number of beets is maybe good marketing, but it's not really informative marketing. When people put the level of nitrates as you do, if they're using a beet powder, look at the ingredient list. Sometimes those ingredient lists will include one of their ingredients further down on the list will be sodium nitrate. So now you know how they got some of their nitrates in their product is through a synthetic product that was sodium nitrate that's manufactured. If they don't, if they are only using whole root or whole juice powder, you have to look at the level and say, is it reasonably possible that could have that much nitrates, depending on what they're saying. Again, it's going to be variable. So if they are capable of standardizing to a 2% beet juice powder, then you can do the math and say, well, could 10 grams possibly have, if I've got 10 grams of powder of whole beet powder, if it was 2%, how much nitrates would I really have in there?
Correct.
And if they have more nitrates than that, then you have to wonder where those nitrates came from.
Exactly, and I think it leads us into one of my almost last questions, which is you said people need to look at the label and sodium nitrate, which is being used for spiking. Now, let's briefly say why people should be concerned about it.
Well, if you want a natural source of nitrates, I mean, the real issue is what are you looking for as a consumer? If it's a natural source of nitrates, that's not a natural source of nitrates. It's a synthetic source of nitrates. So it's really just what you're looking for and what you want in a product. If you want a product that's supplemented with synthetics, then that's fine, if that's what you want. But most people are looking for natural sources of nitrates and not synthetic sources. That's what they think they're paying for.
Yes, I agree. And I really am glad that we made that statement, because people need to just understand the differences. And of course, the decision belongs to them, and we are not imposing to do one thing or the other. Do what's right for you, but just know the differences.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And you know what? Let's go into the last part of our conversation. Let's talk about the recent independent study that was done by IUPUI on the 25 different beet-related products and the inconsistencies the researchers found in the tested product. We've learned that Ricin had the highest number of nitrates per gram from all of the tested products. Let's emphasize the points of exactly what they found and what people, again, should be understanding from the study when they come across it.
Well, I thought the study was extremely interesting because it was done by, it was a university study. It was done totally independently of any, possible influence from people that are in the nitrate business. It was truly an investigation of the variability of nitrates in various beet products, which it wasn't funded by anybody that's selling a beet product at all. It came from a grant that was available for research from the university. So that was the first thing that I thought was interesting. They looked at a number of different kinds of products. They looked at powders, they looked at mixed beverages that had beet in it, and concentrates and bulk powders. And if you look at the milligrams of nitrates per gram of product. It's not talking about doses. It's not talking about anything in serving size or anything like that, but just per gram of product. To put it in perspective, Resync had the milligrams of nitrate per gram of product was in this study about 34 milligrams. There was, and looking at the entire list, the next highest product only had about 16, so it was half the nitrate level of Resync. And you know, making the point that I made earlier about beverages, the highest level of nitrates were always in powders, because it's taking all the nitrate that's available in the whole source. But the beverages were very low. The concentrates were higher than the beverages, because what a concentrate is it's taking a beverage and it's just basically removing some of the water. And then you've got the bulk juices were quite low as well. So mixed beverages is not surprising, because they're taking beet juice and they're adding apple juice to make it taste better, or they're adding cranberry juice or whatever juice. I'm not familiar with each one of the products, but they're adding other liquids or other things to flavor the beverage, so it's not just beet juice.
Sure, or cherry.
But the bulk beet juices, the highest one of all had 2 milligrams per gram of product, as opposed to 34 that Resync had. So, but what I found, confirming as well of what I've learned in all the work that I've done with vegetable powders over the years in trying to create a standardized product, is the extreme high level of variability. This university study even found within different samples of the same product.
Correct.
And some of these are branded products, and I'm not going to mention brand names or anything like this, because it's not about them. It's about the fact that the products, according to this university study, have a high degree of variability from one package to the next package. They went out in the marketplace, they purchased product off the shelf and took it into their labs and tested the nitrate content. They tested the nitrate content using the same method for everything that they tested. So there was consistency from product to product. One of the things that you also find in the marketplace is there are different ways to test for nitrates, and different testing methods might yield different results from a pure numerical sense. So where you could take a product and test it with one method, and it might say there's X% of nitrates, and then another method might say that there's Y% of nitrates from the same exact product. That's just testing methodology variation, and that's not abnormal. But what is normal is that if you use the same methods on everything you test, they'll at least be consistent with each other. It's kind of like when you get on your scale in the morning. If you get on one, we've got a couple of scales in my house, and when I get on one scale, I weigh 5 pounds less than I weigh on another scale. So I like that scale better. I'm always 5 pounds less. So on that scale. But if my wife or my kids or anybody else gets on that scale, they're going to have the same difference. So our weight compared to each other will be consistent on a scale. It's just not consistent between the scales. In other words, using different methods. So that was the two interesting things. The most interesting things on the study was the extreme amount of variability that he found, that the researchers found within the same product, different samples, and the fact of the wide range of variability between products.
Correct. And maybe one of the last things, Sid, I would like you to help me to explain to listeners is when I look at the study, and I have it right in front of me, the results of content per serving now, because we already clarified for people that the content per gram which is the most important because it's the pure pretty much product or powder being taken and tested, all of a sudden the graphs have changed dramatically, or have changed, I would say, when you look per serving. So I think the question people need to ask themselves, how is it possible that all of a sudden a pure juice, beet juice, nothing else in it, could get over 60 millimoles per serving of nitrates?
Yeah, I don't know how he did his serving size. So I can't, I chose, I looked at those numbers and I couldn't figure out rationally what those numbers meant. I know what he's saying, but I don't know how he derived his numbers. So I can't comment on the cost per serving column, or how he determined what a serving is. I did notice a wide degree of variability. So for example, when he's got they've got a graph that has a content per serving, nitrate contents per serving, and it had a juice that was far and above anybody else.
Correct.
In their contents per serving. And the only way a juice can be higher is if you're drinking a lot. So because juices by nature of what they are, they're water. I mean, they're water with a little bit of stuff in it. I mean, a natural juice is going to be 98% water. That's why it's a juice. Recognize a beet, a whole beet, a solid beet, is probably between 85% to 90% water. When we dry a beet, and I've been very involved in drying fruits and vegetables. When you dry a beet, if you put 10 pounds of beets in a dryer, you won't even get 1 pound of powder out of that 10 pounds of beets. Well, if you put 10 pounds of juice into a dryer, you'll probably get less than a third of a pound, because there's such a little amount of solids in there. So how a serving, I mean, unless they had a massive serving of juice, I can't explain how they could possibly get that much nitrate out of a serving of juice.
Sure. And it's something that we should probably emphasize, that if someone wants, a pouch of Resync, which has below 8 grams, and you dissolve it in 8 to 12, 16 ounces of water,
Mm-hmm.
You get 4.35 millimoles per nitrates. And we know that, the studies show that anywhere between 4 and 8 nitrates is where people get the most physiological changes. Anything above, 16 doesn't really affect the human body that much, or at least the studies on the well-trained athletes, that's what they show. So again, people, I think, need to ask how they want to consume their products, if they want a natural or potentially synthetically spiked products, and if they want a purely, beet powder, or are they willing to try another source, like in this case, red spinach, which is standardized, and at least they know what they pay for.
Okay, so the other thing to think about when you're buying a product is not only what are you getting, meaning how much nitrates are you really getting, which is the most important thing because that's why you're buying it, but also think about what you're not getting. Beets are by nature, if you think about, beets are very high in sugar. The majority of white table sugar that you get in the United States comes from beets. Now the beets, when you're buying a beet powder, it's a different beet, but it's still very, very high in sugar. That's why the powder is so sweet, because it's high in sugar. Red spinach extract has no sugar in it at all. So you don't get if you're trying to cut down on sugar, which a lot of people are, you'll have much less sugar in a red spinach extract. You'll also, there's a compound in beets called oxalates. Oxalates can be a factor in kidney stones. It can, there are people that have problems with oxalates. A lot of times when your doctor will tell you to stay away from spinach or stay away from beets, or stay away from those kinds of vegetables that are high in oxalates. Red spinach extract, because it's an extract, we don't extract the oxalates. We leave them behind. So the red spinach extract has no oxalates in it. It's also got a neutral pH, so it doesn't have any pH effect on you, and it's got a very neutral color. So if you're mixing this product in water, for example, you don't have to worry about spilling it on your white shirt because it's not going to stain. So these are things that you can think about as well when you should think about as well when you're buying a product. Summarizing, is it possible for the product to have, is your product making any claims on how much nitrates you're actually getting, or is it just telling you how many beets you're getting? You don't want beets, you want nitrate. So you should be thinking, how much nitrates am I getting? How much sugar am I getting? What's the oxalate level? The other thing interesting about red spinach is it's very high in potassium, which is one of those minerals that we're always looking for. So there are a lot of positives about the red spinach extract that you don't get when you're buying a whole beet powder.
No, absolutely. Those are very valuable points to make a comparison between those two vegetables. And we're doing this for an educational purposes because I truly believe people need to start asking themselves the right questions when it comes to buying product and what they're paying for. They need to understand. And I think when they know those differences, they will start making better choices for themselves.